Ben Riggs presents Reading D&D Aloud. Episode 42. Pirate Borg's designer knows the Smashing Pumpkins.
Greetings, humans. I am amateur demagogue, apparently controversial historian. I've been told also that I'm the king of virtue signaling, but my name is Ben Riggs, and I'll stop whinging. Sorry, but I'm Ben Riggs, and with me is it's difficult to describe the hotness of this game designer.
Oh,
Um,
wow.
it it's just true. Like the list of hot up and coming game designers is probably relatively short, but I think this man's name would have to be on it. It is Luke Stratton, the impresario of Pirate Borg. He is not only the game's designer, writer, you also did all the art?
I did. Yes, I did. Yes.
This book, you did all the, like, you did the
Yes.
cover?
I did all the art. I mean, there are a few pieces of public domain art, but you'll be able to tell if it looks like an old 18th century oil painting. I didn't do it, but other than that, yes, I did everything.
Like the Conquistador?
And I did that. Yep, with my own two hands, my own one hand.
Yeah. Um, like it reminds me of the Dark of Hot Springs Island, but there was
Oh,
like a
yeah.
team of dudes doing that.
Well, look, I mean, there's a team of dudes, but really, there's one guy who did all the art that not all the art, but the art that is really the look of that book. Um, Gabriel is one of my biggest influences, honestly. So,
Wow.
and Jacob is Hurst, who did a lot of the writing and is kind of the project lead, is another one of my biggest influences. So,
Okay, so I'm struggling with where to begin because there's so much to discuss, but I guess
let's go.
I'll
Let's go deep. Yeah, where you want to go?
I'll ask you about the most intriguing thing that you led with right before I hit record, which was the Smashing Pumpkins. As
Yes.
a
Well,
Gen Xer.
you asked me how I wanted to be introduced, and I was like, well, if you know about the pumpkins thing, you can mention that if you like, so prior to COVID, for the 10 or 12 years prior to COVID, after college, I went to school for music, but I got into concert lighting design. Mostly I worked for jam bands at first, but in 2018 I kind of climbed my way up the proverbial gig ladder. And in 2018, I got called for a medical thing to fill in for Smashing Pumpkins. And they liked me and kept me around. And I was with them for like 5 or 6 years. As their, last year I went to 20 countries with them, and I literally retired because Pirate Borg and Limithron are doing so well. And the band all have different tie-ins to D&D that are really fun to talk about, and they were all very happy for me. So
Okay, what's Billy Corgan's tie into D&D? I'll ask. I mean,
Billy Corgan has never really been a D&D guy, but he grew up, he was neighbors with the printers that worked for TSR. And he has a bunch of old TSR stuff in his, like, I don't know, storage or something, and he would tell me about it from time to time.
okay, how about James?
James, James, I didn't even realize he was into D&D, but he found out about my book like later than everybody else. He didn't really know that it was a thing. He's like, I heard you like make, James is really, really nice, but he's very quiet. And he's like, I heard you made a D&D game. And I was like, yeah, it's like pirates. And I was like, can I have a copy? And I was like, absolutely. And I gave him a copy, and he hasn't really played since he was a kid. But it was a big part of his thing. But Jimmy Chamberlain he hasn't really played since he was a kid either, but his new drum kit is inspired by the art in the Fiend Folio, and his daughter plays a lot of fifth edition. So I gave her a copy and was like, hey, come on to the dark side, come over to the OSR.
I mean, as a Gen Xer, I'm losing my mind here.
Yeah,
Um,
I had a meeting the other day. We're working on translations for Pirate Borg, which is very exciting news, and we're going to announce who all we're signing with very soon. But one of the publishers, I told him, and he, like, his his face like flipped. He like couldn't look at me the same anymore. It was really funny. Yeah, and I'm
So
I'm a millennial, but they call what do they call it? Xennial? Like I'm 83, so like uh Siamese Dream is like one of my top five records of all time. So to get that call and to light that music was really,
oh
really, really
God,
fun. Yeah.
Siamese Dream was so good.
Yeah.
So I hope that we have not lost the audience as
Yeah.
we
Well,
are.
look, we probably lost like 80%, but the other 20 are like, they're here. They're ready to go.
I mean, again, in the '90s, Smashing Pumpkins is probably top five band. Like
Yep.
it's
It's weird
different.
because they had kind of a like really rough later part of the 90s and basically broke up and were on hiatus and then they came back with a kind of different sound. So like if you aren't, around my age or older, like there's a good chance you weren't a teenager when they were really, really famous. And so I meet people who are young who don't know who they are, but then I meet like the next generation down who are like, but like they have a lot of young fans. So yeah, I digress. We don't have to talk about the
No,
Pumpkins
this
the whole
is
time.
so. Well, and again, it's interesting to me because a thing I will say a lot of the time to older people who are not into D&D or role-playing games is you need to think of D&D as like rock and roll. Like when you
Hmm.
were growing up, like you were aware of rock and roll. It was a cool thing to be into, and lots of people were into it all the time. D&D is like that now, where it's just kind of this normal thing that people think is kind of cool. They're into it, and if they're not playing, they'd be interested in trying it out. Um,
Yeah.
and again, because again, in my experience, if people are older than 50 and not into role playing games, they don't see that and it's new to them. So that's how I explain it to them. But
Yeah, that's
uh,
good.
yeah, and I'll hold off on any more Smashing Pumpkins talk because
I mean, I
you
don't know,
know
maybe we can keep going later and it can be like a, whatever. I'm down.
it's a
I'm down for anything, man.
it's a nostalgic sweet spot. But I
Yeah.
suppose I will start with this book. Um,
Yes. Oh, yes, I have my copy here. Yes.
and for those of you listening, we are both holding up copies of Morkborg, although is it Merkborg, I suppose in
So,
Swedish?
yeah, I
Do you
mean,
know?
I listen, I have basically been given permission by Johan and Pella to say Morkborg. They say that's how all the English people say it. They kind of say it that way when they're over here. They say in the book it says Merkborg in the front cover or in like in the front pages. I think if you're saying it in Swedish, it's a little closer to like Merkborg, maybe. I don't, but I don't speak Swedish, so I just say Morkborg, and that I've committed to that, and it seems to be okay. So
Well, the Swedes, in addition to being all good looking, are so polite and speak such good English that it
yes,
becomes somewhat irrelevant. But so this kind of exploded onto the TTRPG scene.
it really
Um,
did. Yeah.
and so I'll just to give out some credits really quick. It's original text ideas and game design by Pell Nilsson. I hope I'm pronouncing it right.
I think it's Pella, but yeah, you're close enough.
Graphic design and artwork by Johan Noor. Um, and English writing and creative consultation with Patrick Stewart. Patrick Stewart is uh, OSR mind of long standing. God, what was it? A sub mining station? I'm forgetting the name of it.
Oh,
Oh,
Deep
Veins
Carbon
of the Earth.
Observatory,
Yeah,
and
Deep Carbon
yeah,
Observatory, Veins of
and
the
this
Earth.
is I think his many consider his magnum opus is Veins of the Earth.
So, I mean, having him as your, it's like having, I'm trying to think of, Trent Reznor pops to mind for some reason as
I know, yeah,
translator,
like, it'd
but
be like having Trent Reznor come punch up your record. Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
exactly.
Um, And again, if you're not aware of this, I'm just going to read you the back of the book for starters, because that and the again podcast followers, the cover is a skeleton kind of with a bull's head, with a bloodied sword and a bloody shield, and it has a real heavy metal vibe and aesthetic. And I'm going to just start with the back of the book, which says, "A doom metal album of a game, a spiked flail to the face, rules light, heavy on everything else. One day all will blacken and burn, just as the two-headed basilisks have predicted. The world is dying, time is short. How will you face these last days? Robbing graves for soil-stained wealth, or facing down the apocalypse, hoping it can be fought?" Um, And again, to me, Morkborg is more of a vibe than anything else.
100%.
But
It's
you tell me about
100%.
your experience with the game.
Well, okay, so I had slowly and surely like delved deeper and deeper into this thing we call the OSR. I was running and writing and playing a lot of fifth edition. And I was running a pirate campaign, like all things I do. And it was, hey, we're gonna level cap this one at 6, and we're gonna long rest, like can only happen on land, and only pick these spells, and retheme your, it's like all these things to make it fit the genre. So I was starting to delve into the OSR, and I had got these magazines called Knock by the Merry Mushman. Really, really incredible, kind of like collections of blog articles that have been relayed out and illustrated, that kind of like really give you good insights into the OSR. And for those not familiar, that's the old school Renaissance or old school revival, as some call it. And kind of through that, like, kind of, oh, this is a cool graphic design approach to RPGs. I discovered Mork Borg, and I got the PDF, and I was like, this is cool, but like the rule, like there's only 4 abilities and there's no skills. Like, could you actually run this for like a real amount of time? Well, I had started, this was like in COVID, and was running my Patreon, which I had started in COVID, making pirate ship battle maps. And I was getting burnout on running my campaign because it was like every day, all day making maps, and then I got to prep this campaign. So I took a break from running, and one of my players ran. We all took turns running, but one of them was like, "Hey, can I run this? I got this cool game on Kickstarter. It's this Swedish death metal game called Markborg. Can we run it?" And he ran it for I think 4 sessions for us, and it was the most fun we'd all ever had playing an RPG. So basically taking all those rules out and like selling, like if you haven't seen this book, you can pick it up and understand the world in the first 10 pages. You don't need to read anything. It's literally like transmuted to you, almost like through divination, if you will. For me, as a very graphic visual person, I learned a huge lesson that I can get a role-playing game and get the world and know how to run it and know how to exist into it with the art and the graphic design. So yeah, that was my descent into the madness that is Morkborg. And then I decided to make a hack of it that was pirates, and it went from a short thing to a long thing, and from a long thing to a really successful thing on Kickstarter, and then a signed thing by Free League, and yeah, now here we are.
Um, where again, I'm kind of at a where to begin place. I guess I'm gonna. I don't know where I got this from. It's 40 city events from
That
Morkborg.
that is an insert in their GM screen. The GM screen has a little like plastic, like picture, like tabs you might have in a photo album, and it comes with inserts so you can cover up one of the rules panels and replace it with random tables.
I would like to just read a few of the 40 city events again for
Oh,
people who may be
please do.
unaware of
Yes.
Morkborg. But I'm just going to read 3 kind of at random. And the question this answers is, what filth does the city vomit? 1, exhausted corpse carter heading for the graves with a full load. D4 nobles promenading, beating people beneath them with gilded clubs. Urchin painting "Listen" with goat's blood on a wall. Fishmonger trying to fend off a pack of stray cats. Drunken clerk stumbling, falling, scrolls and maps everywhere. Occultist placing copper coins in intricate patterns. Devastated eyeless peasant in a pillory begs for water. The smell of dry snuff, herbs, and hash from a crowded market. 2 monkeys eating what's left of a dead raven. And again, it just bleeds mood
Oh
and
yeah.
feeling. And again, the question of can you run Morkborg, I think, is a valid one. Uh, but also in some ways, I kind of who cares? like,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
uh, like I decided like 5 years ago I was just not buying any more D&D clones, D&D retro clones. I'm like, I have so many. And D&D isn't even my main jam. I just can't do it anymore. And then I saw Morkborg and I'm like, okay, that one. And I did the same thing with Shadow Dark. And again, like I feel like you could use the Shadow Dark rules and still use everything that's good in Morkborg, which is kind of this implicit apocalyptic setting. And the game even ends, right? Like you roll
Yes.
random events and like eventually the game just ends, right?
So it's interesting. This is like I think an often ignored part of actual play of Morkborg, unless you're really committing to a campaign. But there is a table. First off, it's a list of scriptures that are presented like psalms, but they're also presented in table form. And then there is a suggestion for the GM to roll a die every morning in game, and on the roll of a 1 you read off one of the psalms, and after the 7th psalm the world ends. And of course they suggest a die size based on how long you want your campaign to be. If it's a short campaign, just roll a d4, and after rolling 7 for rolling 1 rolling 1 7 times, the world will end. But if you want to play for years, roll a d100 and it may never end. But it's one of those things that always gets mentioned because it's so different. There's nothing in this game about how do you stop the world from ending. It's like it is ending. What are you going to do during it?
Well, one of the things I find so interesting about Morkborg is a role-playing game is not a novel. You don't sit down to read it expecting to have an aesthetic experience. But with Morkborg, and really, I think this is a feature of the OSR, a lot of it does give you this aesthetic experience when you sit down and read it. Like you can have feelings and engage with the setting, because typically the writing is off the charts good, and the art is also just fascinating and intriguing and pulls you in. Um, and Morkborg does both of those things. And like, I prefer the rules of Shadow Dark. I'm running some Shadow Dark. I love Shadow Dark, but like when I sat down to read it, I was like, like what's all the hubbub about it? I don't quite get it. Then I ran it and I was like, oh, I get it. It's a Cadillac of a rule set. It's fantastic.
It's
But it does
very
not.
well oiled for
Oh
what it
yeah,
is doing. Yes.
but it does not give you an aesthetic experience. And Morkborg really does.
It really does.
Holy crap. So how did you again you told me that you married this with pirates because you kind of were running a game and then you were like, well, let's adapt it to Morkborg. Um, but what made you think that this would be a good marriage? Because I will admit, I saw Pirate Borg and I was like, this is absurd. What is happening? Like, again, I didn't back the first Kickstarter, then I backed the second, because I was like, I just don't know, guys. I don't know. I backed Cyborg, because I'm a total total what's the word I'm looking for? I'm Randy for cyber systems. Like anything that's that gives me the whiff of Shadowrun, I'll probably back it.
Yeah,
Um,
sure.
so I did that, but I was like, I don't know. I'm not that into pirates. So what made you think that Morkborg was going to be a good fit for your pirate game?
Well, I actually hear this a lot I hear a lot of people. If people are resistant to Pirate Borg, it's usually because they don't like the pirate trope. And that's totally fine. I mean, that's totally fine with me. I have no problem with if you don't like pirates or you don't like my game. But the thing for me is that the pirate thing that I always want to do, it doesn't exist. It's always at the fringe. Like it's always like, oh, there's one faction or two factions in the pirate source book that you bought that are like the thing that I want. Like I don't want to be Earl Flynn. I don't want to be I mean, like, maybe Jack Sparrow, but like Will Turner is he's a good guy, and like I want to be Barbossa's crew, I want to like look for cursed relics, and I want half the crew to die along the way, and I want to like be in a very grim, dark world, so I mean, basically, like this game is the setting. I've been working on the setting long before I found out about Morkborgs, which is why it's such a good fit. The setting is called the Dark Caribbean, and it's basically an undead infested of the Caribbean, because why not? That's the game I want to play. So when we were playing this for our break, we were playing Morkborg. Morkborg, one of the cool things about it is it has the best license for third-party creators in the entire industry because it's basically you can do whatever you want with our rules, including hacks, as long as you don't take our non-mechanical text or take our art. Like there's not even an SRD. You can like literally do whatever you want. So if you go look on like Ex Libris, this is a website that tracks all the third-party stuff. I think there's like 2,000 pieces of content for Morkborg now. Pirate Borg is over a couple hundred now. Cyborg has a bunch of hacks. Like there's so much content made for these games. So when I found out about that, I was like, oh, wait, rather than just making this book that I'm working on a 5e setting, why don't I do it for this system too? And then I found that this is actually a better fit, you know, having to roll on a table to see if you're missing a limb or not when you start is the kind of thing that works for a pirate game, you know?
So I was skeptical, and then I was at Gary Con, and I was like, I saw it, and I'm like, well, I'll pick it up because everyone says it's hot shit. So I'm like, okay, let me check it out. And then an embarrassing story happened, which I said you can tell or not.
I wasn't gonna tell it. I don't think it's embarrassing. I think it's actually really kind of enduring.
I think it's embarrassing, but you can tell the story.
So at GaryCon last year, I did not have a booth. I had my books on consignment at a vendor. And, you know, I went into the hall like 2 or 3 times the whole time just to like, you know, check in. And I happened to like go by my booth or go by the booth where my books were. And you were there looking at a book. And, and I was like, just because I have been on the other side of that equation enough times, like if the creator walked up to a game that I was thinking about buying, I would want to know. I said to you, like, hey, just want you to know, like, if you pick that up, I'd be happy to sign it. And I wasn't like trying to get you to buy it. I was just like, you know, trying to offer that, you know. And you said, oh, cool. And you walked to the cash register and paid and then walked away. And I was like, and then I forget when I didn't know you looked like at the time. I think maybe you introduced yourself or someone recognized
I did. I was
you.
like, "Hey, I'm Ben Riggs. Good to meet you. I think I might have given you a card."
Yeah, okay. I didn't know if it was at that moment or not. And I was like, oh my God, that's so cool. Like, why are you looking at my book? You know, but it was just really funny that you just like, and I think you told me later, right, that you just didn't want to bother me, which to me, like, it would have been one of the cooler things of the whole like year, you know?
So it was that at that precise moment, uh, God, John Ratliff. I think that's his. I'm so embarrassed that I can't remember his name, but a TSR editor was standing in the next aisle. I think John Ratliff. He's been on the
Oh,
show, and I'm
okay.
so embarrassed if I get his name wrong. Um, and he had for me a bunch of letters between sent from TSR to the Tolkien estate and back
Oh,
from the Tolkien
wow.
estate. And I saw him, and he's there with his wife. He's in poor health. He lives in Washington, and he flew out. And he also, um, so I'll tell this story and hope that it doesn't get me in trouble. Um, but this is a conversational show, and I suppose we should be somewhat disclosing. So, in addition to sitting on things like these letters from TSR to the Tolkien estate and back, which were fascinating, in 1997, at some point, uh, Peter Adkison was in Lake Geneva, Wisconsin, as CEO of Wizards of the Coast, negotiating the purchase of TSR from Lorraine Williams and with the Dungeons and Dragons. Because it's 1997, he's doing all of his work on paper in
Hmm.
a big fat binder. And at some point, Peter Adkison leaves Lake Geneva, Wisconsin, and returns to Seattle. Yet the binder remains. The
No,
binder
no.
remained in Lake Geneva, Wisconsin. And John Ratliff picked it up and, and he held it for like 30 years.
Oh,
And
wow.
then he sent it to me. So, like, you know, it's just full, absolutely cram packed with minutia from the time.
Wow.
Both
That is a trove, my friend. Wow.
So yeah, like his directions of how Peter Adkison got from Chicago to the Lake Geneva,
Yeah.
um, right down to TSR sales numbers to people asking for a job. Dave Arneson wrote him two letters asking to be put in charge of Dungeons and Dragons, and
Wow.
he doesn't even spell Peter Adkison's name right in them. And Peter Adkison doesn't even reply. He's like, I don't know what to say. This is kind of awkward. Not gonna write him back. Um,
Wow.
so that is the
Wait.
guy that I saw right after I saw
Yeah,
you,
sure.
and
Sure.
I'm like, John, gonna
Wait,
get
I have a follow-up question.
go for it.
Like, what was the nature of the Tolkien TSR letters? Was it about like
See,
the Ent and Hobbit stuff or like licensing or something I can't fathom?
because
You're like, let me pull them out.
I'm incredibly messy, but also well organized. It's a true mystery. Um, so let's see. I have them sitting right here. Uh, Let me read you one. Um, so what's happening here is TSR wants the rights to Middle Earth and Lord of the Rings for game products, but also for either novelizations
Mm,
or choose your own adventure style books, something like that. They don't just want to do game material because at the time the books at TSR are just knocking the doors off the place. They might be the second biggest publisher of fantasy fiction in North America at this point.
yeah.
Yesterday, uh, I don't have a ton of novel sales numbers, but I have a bunch from 1994, 1995, and 1996, which are not great sales years. But just for fun, I put together a chart of the first three Drist books sales from those years. And I think in those 3 years combined, Salvatore sold like 70,000 copies of each one of those books, which is nuts, like absolutely insane. And that is the first book I think came out in 1988. So we're talking about 6 years after its debut. It's still moving tens of thousands of copies. So the novel sales for TSR are just so incredibly strong. And that is why they want to dig in here with the Tolkien estate
Yeah.
and get the rights to do either novelizations or choose your own adventures. So this is um, to Mary Butler, the publishing director for Tolkien at HarperCollins Publishers, 7785 Fulham Palace Road, Hammersmith, London, RE Lord of the Rings Adventure Game Books license. And let me make sure I have the back of it here. Okay. I think these two go together. If not, I'm making a terrible mistake. So, dear Miss Butler, Lori Battle of Tolkien Enterprises suggested that I write you to plead my company's case as regards the acquisition of a license to publish choose your own adventure style game books. Our trademark brand is known as Endless Quest Books. I know that you are aware that my company is engaged in negotiations with Lori to obtain the Tolkien license for role playing games. In connection therewith, we have also asked for the rights to publish Endless Quest books based on Tolkien property. It is the conviction of our management that these rights are essential to marketing the games to the many dedicated Tolkien fans who may not be game players. The Endless Quest books are specialty game books, literally adventure games packaged in a paperback book format. These books are not prose stories and are intended only to supplement the Tolkien canon, not compete with it. Game books will broaden our target audience potential by appealing to younger people, 8 to 10 years old, and will benefit the estate by increasing interest in Tolkien. Encouraging interest among young readers inevitably will have a positive effect on sales of Tolkien books in general. And then they continue to give the specifics here. Hopefully, this is not minutia, but our offer for the game book rights is as follows. You want to guess how much they're offering for the rights to Lord of the Rings?
I have no idea. I mean, it's for Lord of the Rings, but for like a kind of niche product
Yeah,
that
and
they think.
this is again 1992.
I mean, I don't know, $100,000.
25,000.
I mean, I was gonna say 50, and then I was like, let's go big. So
So,
I guess I was double wrong in my head.
but again, it's just I mean, what did Amazon pay like $300 million
Yeah, I
for
mean
the
that. Yeah,
rights?
that seems. I'm trying to like put it through the lens, and also like, Tolkien is big, but not the behemoth it is now in a lot of
Yeah.
ways. Yeah.
We will pay a guarantee of $25,000 per year against a royalty rate of 5% of our net wholesale selling price per each Endless Quest book sold, and we are seeking a 5-year license. We think these are generous terms, and obviously the Tolkien estate would have complete approval over the contents of each book. We genuinely feel that the Endless Quest rights are an important key to success for a line of Tolkien role playing products. I cannot stress how strongly our management feels about this issue. And that is really, really true because and this is from David R. Fox, Vice President of Business Affairs, CC DeLorean Williams. When John Ratliff flew to London to beg to be allowed to do the Endless Quest books.
Mm,
And he says he was turned down by Christopher Tolkien personally, uh, in dramatic fashion. Like they could have the rights to do game products, but nothing like a novelization or a choose your own adventure style book. And Lorraine Williams' response was not worth our time. Uh,
wow.
and again, it's very easy to look at that and be like, "Ah, what a dumb move!" But again, in 1992, it was not what it would be 10
Yes.
years later. Obviously,
Wait. So did they get a role playing game license?
they did not. They
I,
passed on it. They were like, "It's not worth it if we're only going to get a role playing
oh,
game
because they want to
license."
build more of a brand than just a. Yeah, I understand.
Yeah, because at the time, again, I'd have to pull it up. It looked like novels were about 50% of the business at the time.
Wow. Yeah.
Uh, so they're like, well, if we can't do both, we're not going to do it. And again, it makes sense because, like, every new game world they came out with, they had novels, I think. Again, maybe not Planescape. I don't know, actually. I don't know if there's
Yeah.
Planescape
Okay.
novels.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
I mean, I remember. I didn't really play D&D back in the day. The first thing I ever played was the Leading Edge Games Alien Adventure game. I got
wow.
invited to a session of that when I was 12, but I didn't get into role playing games until much more recently. But I remember seeing like the Dragonlance novels. I was like, that's what I thought D&D was. Like just looking at the covers of those and wow, Forgotten Realms.
So, how did you get into role playing games?
Oh, it's a pretty good story actually. I mean, I dabbled. I was saying this on my show the other day that, and for me, high school was music and drugs, not role playing games. And in the few moments when I would get in trouble, or when I got out of being into lots of drugs and I started a software company, I was bored and I would play games with my brother because he was always a gamer. So I did my concert career and whatnot, but I was never really, really into games. But then when I'm trying to tell the short version of this. When I turned 30, my brother worked in Hollywood, just recently left to come work for me. But he was an assistant director in Hollywood. When I turned 30, apparently when we were kids, we watched Michael Douglas's The Game. And I was like, I wish someone would the game me. So when I turned 30, he the gamed me. He got all his Hollywood friends and they like,
I'm sorry. Can you tell people who could you tell people who might not know what the game is,
yes,
what
okay,
the
so
movie The
the
Game
game
is?
in this amazing movie by David Fincher, starring Michael Douglas, where his brother buys this game. It's like a kind of, we call it like an alternate reality AR game now. Um and the company starts like doing weird little pranks on him, and they like his TV starts talking to him and stuff like that. But then it kind of turns out, I'm going to try not to spoil it, but it gets bad, and it seems like the whole thing is a con to steal Michael Douglas's money because he's wealthy. So my brother kind of mimics this, and he like put me in my girlfriend at the time, my wife's hotel room, and they like got the room next to it and hacked the TV, so the TV started talking to me, and then they had us get arrested by cops. They did all this crazy stuff for my 30th birthday. And he made a documentary about it. It's on YouTube. You just look up Luke Stratton the Game. It's long, but it's really cool. So I'm trying to shorten this up.
You don't need to
For
shorten
his
this up. This is gold.
Okay, yeah. Well, for his 30th birthday, I was like, I got to get this guy back, man. I can't. I don't have Hollywood friends. I can't like pull something like that off. But maybe I can do more of a like, fantasy experience. And we both really, really love Tolkien, and Lord of the Rings is by far my favorite book, IP, everything. And my wife and I had a pretty much Hobbit themed wedding, So for his 30th birthday, I put together this thing where he met us at a like learn to joust place. But he had to come in costume, and I had all our family. My dad dressed up as a wizard. My mom dressed up as like a high elf, and we like had this thing where he had to like learn to joust, and then we spun it into a session of the One Ring RPG, which I learned how to run for this thing, and then we did an escape room. But in the process for prepping for the learning to run the One Ring, which is actually not a very good first RPG to run, it's kind of got some weird clunky things in it. uh, my wife and I went to a meetup.com meetup and learned to play some fifth edition. And I was like, the group we went to was like not that great, but I had the bug, and then started playing regularly with one of her friends. And then before you knew it, I was like, oh, this is actually the thing I've been wanting my whole life that I had never really gotten into. And then
Wow.
COVID hit and changed everything. So
It's remarkable. I think you're the oldest person I can think of to get into role-playing games. Because you said it
yeah.
was after you're 30, right?
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I think probably like 2017, maybe 2018 was when I really, I mean, like I had played, like I said, when I was 12, my cousin invited me to play a one shot of this Alien game, which was amazing. And probably the reason the reason my brother got so into role playing games, because I talked about this session like it was the coolest thing I'd ever done. And then I ended up running Star Wars. I think it was the D6 system for him once or twice, just because I would listen to him and his friends play and be like, "No, you guys are doing it wrong. Let me do it." But I literally did not even try D&D until fifth edition. Yeah, in my 30s, late 30s. Yeah,
I have okay, I'm gonna just take 5 steps back to where I was originally going, which was so because I purchased this book at GaryCon and then ran away from you.
yes.
Um, even though I was like, pirates again, not really my jam. I then sat down and read it, and I was like, oh crap, this is incredible. like,
Well, thank
like
you.
I it's, I am becoming convinced that the most important quality for a role-playing game to possess is that it is inspiring, by which I mean it inspires a game master to pick it up and actually run the game. Um, More than anything else, I think that's the number
Yeah.
one quality that makes a game successful. I did a 1 year campaign of the One Ring second edition, and I know what you mean when you're like, there's kind of some clunky weird things in there. Um, but
Like especially first edition with the TN system, it's like in the stances. That's really hard for like a brand new GM to really run at the table.
Yeah, and for those of you who aren't unfamiliar, in combat, you pick a stance for your character to be in, and it's supposed to accentuate teamwork and team play at the table. And it makes sense with Tolkien, but again, if you haven't played a role-playing game before, it's kind of weird. Um, but so again, I ran it for a year. My friends loved it. I loved it, even though again, some weird stuff in there. But we dealt with the weird stuff because it was again, I was inspired to run it. Like it was a way to step into Middle Earth in a real way, which was absolutely incredible. And it was I teach seventh and eighth grade, and they go away to an away camp 2 weeks every year, once in the fall, once in the spring. So of course I have to go and chaperone a few nights at the away camp,
Yeah.
and I brought Pirate Borg with me,
Oh,
and
really?
yeah, so it's now we're to lights out. The boys are trying to break into the girls' dorm, claiming that they need to return a bunch of beds that they'd stolen previously and that it must be done now. And I'm like, no, get back in your dorm. And meanwhile, another kid is trying to have a date with a girl from another school on the porch, and everyone wants to watch that happen. And the entire time. All I want to do is sit down and read more Pirate Borg. And I'm
Yeah.
walking around with the book yelling at the kids, and they're like, "What's that?" I'm like, "It's a role-playing game." They're like, "Give it to us." I'm like, "No!" But because they of course all like D&D too, so they like role-playing
Yeah.
games. But
Yeah.
like that was my so that was what was going on when I was trying to read it. But Pirate Borg, for all my like, I'm not that into pirates, it is definitely like, "Oh, I have to run this sometime now. It's so good." Like, there's factions. Again, I've heard some people describe it as Cthulhu-esque, and
Yes.
it certainly
Yeah.
is. And there's drugs and it's ash, right?
Yes. Ash is the psychoactive chemical left behind from the destroyed undead, which is the main. I describe it as spice meets magic mushrooms.
Well, it's funny because I saw that and I was like, I immediately thought of it as a sort of symbolic oil. Like, I love Moby Dick. Moby Dick is one of my favorite books. And I'm like, oh, yeah, so you have to go kill the horrors to get the stuff, just like you
Yeah.
have to kill the whales to get the oil.
Yeah.
Um, but it really fulfilled the uh, I'm inspired to run it and overcame my prejudice against pirates.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I think that when I'm done with Shadowdark, that might be what's up next. And then you said your last Kickstarter was Ravenloft, but on a ship.
Well, there's a lot in the last Kickstarter, but the main thing is a book called Down Among the Dead, which has in it a bunch of things, three of which are longer form adventures. One of those is Ravenloft on a ship. Yes, it's a vampire ship through and through. And we hit the stretch goal to make it like an expanded adventure. So I've actually like have like a I've instead of a like kind of Romany card reading, it's a card reading through a poker game that an old seaman can do that will place things in different places,
Seaman, okay.
or
Um,
like he's like old sailor dude. But it's very
wow.
much Ravenloft. It's my dedicate or homage to Ravenloft.
It's funny for Ravenloft being as good as it is, and this pillar of the role-playing game culture is probably the best way to put it. I mean, how many people have busted into or out of the window in the crypt of Castle Ravenloft?
Yeah,
Millions of people. Like everyone knows where that where that window is at this point. You would
yeah.
think more people would do like, so this is my take on Ravenloft.
Well, I mean,
Um,
even in me doing it, I like there are times when I'm like, this is too much like it. Like, like I want it to be my own thing. But then when I remember that that's what it is, it's like, okay, it's okay that there's a card reading that you do because people who've played Ravenloft every Halloween for 10 years, maybe they want to play Pirate Ravenloft this year. And you don't want to play Pirate Ravenloft in Barovia. You want to play it on a pirate ship, or on an island, So I just try to take inspiration when I can for it, but I mean I agree. It's like there's so many elements of both the original and the 5e module that are so well done, like a caliber above many other adventures, like the replayability or the fact that it does the vampire castle trope so well, but with D&D mixed in. It just scratches all the itches, especially when it's October. When it's October, like I just want to be in Barovia. So
have you heard the story of how Chris Perkins wrote Curse of Strahd?
no, but I would love to.
Well, it's very brief.
Sure.
So Wizards of the Coast basically takes off the holidays. They're like, okay, Christmas, New Year's, just go. And again, I don't know if it's because people just all save up their days and everyone takes them off at the same time, or if it's an actual official like everybody leave. But essentially, you have like 2 weeks to yourself during that time. And Chris Perkins, when he was in university, um, I forget if he majored in rhetoric or just took a class in rhetoric, but he talked about how in his rhetoric class he had to spend a lot of time writing imitations of other writers. Apparently, a lot of assignments would be like imitate this writer, imitate this writer, imitate this writer, and hoping that
Okay.
in doing so that he learned different techniques. So he gets assigned to write Curse of Strahd. He goes home and writes it all over the break. Like I'm told 95% of the text he personally pounds out in that 2 week break, and that is not a short book.
No,
And
no.
again, even though you have the spine provided by the Hickmans, that there's he put a lot on that
I mean,
skeleton.
yeah, there's a lot more than I6 in Curse of Strahd. Yeah.
Yeah. And so A, to me, it's amazing that he went and did that quickly. And again, I think it's fair to say it's the best 5e campaign put out
I
by
mean,
Wizards of the Coast.
I haven't read them all, but of the ones that I have given any attention to, I think that is very, very obvious, in my opinion.
And it's so striking to me that like it's like he prepared for this in some way in his university training. No one was like, "Well, one day, son,
Yeah,
you'll be told to modernize a 1982 D&D adventure." I think it's
sure.
1982. I don't know, but like in some ways, it's a praise to the university education where it's like, well, you're going to do a lot of intellectual stuff that doesn't have a direct like tie into like everything in everyday life, but someday it's
Yeah.
gonna pay off, and it did for Chris Perkins. Um, and also, he does seem to lead a monkish existence, from everything
Who,
I can tell.
Chris?
Yeah.
Yes, yes, he definitely does. Yes, he definitely does. I have a a funny Chris Perkins story.
Oh, let's hear it.
It's kind of a Jeremy Crawford story, really, but it's this is a little bit of a humble brag, but it was so meaningful for me that I'm going to share it with you because I think maybe you'll appreciate it. I met Chris. I wanted to meet Chris at Gamehole Con 2 years ago, I think. And I have a buddy, Haas, hi Haas, if you're listening, who was like, I listen, Chris is my like favorite designer, even though he's not an OSR guy, he's still top three favorite designers, you know. I really want to give him a copy of the book. And Haas is like, hey, Chris is in my hotel. Like, I see him eating breakfast. So I'm going to go tell him to come by, you know. So he tells him to come by. I mean, whether he came by because of that or whatever, he does his one loop through the hall because Chris stays in his room at cons, you know, he doesn't like go mingle a lot, but always do a pass through the hall. So he does a pass through the hall, and I see him, meet him, get him. I sign his book. We chat for a minute. It's great conversation. You know, he carries on. You know. So then Gen Con, the next year, you know, 10 months later or so, I'm at my booth at Gen Con, and I see Chris doing his one pass through the Gen Con hall with Jeremy Crawford. And I'm like, oh, cool. And I haven't met Jeremy. And I'm like, oh, hi, Jeremy. I love your work. Like, cause you know, like despite being an OSR guy, like I love 5e, like what it does. I still love it. It's just, you know, I've moved what my heart wants from a narrative perspective is a different thing. Right. So Jeremy, and he's like, it's just the two of them. They're not carrying anything except that Jeremy has his like leather bag, and it's his leather bag is like, it's maybe this big, you know, it's not, you couldn't fit a letter size book in it. And he goes, oh, I just bought your book at the Free League booth. And he opens his tiny bag, and the only thing that these two guys are carrying through the hall is a copy of Pirate Borg. And he pulls it out, and he goes, I have a little secret for you. Pirates are getting a lot of love in the new monster manual. And this is like months before all the news knew it was happening. And I was like, oh, and I signed his book, and I was like, that is the coolest moment of my like RPG life, that these two dudes that have like influenced so many people's hours of playing RPGs walked by, and he had my book in his bag. I couldn't even believe it. So
I mean, I have been writing about Jeremy Crawford lately. And I think of him and Chris and Mike Merles as kind of, prophets within our community. Like,
yes,
they went out to the void, and somewhere between mathematics and the imagination, they found this game and they dragged it back into the light.
mm-hmm.
Um, and we see it, and it is good. And again, fifth edition is not perfect, but there's a reason it is the most popular version of D&D ever. And they
Yes,
had a lot of things went right outside of the game, but if that game wasn't as good as it was, I don't know if again, most people who play D&D got their start with fifth edition, which for guys like me sounds very weird, and it's still a little bit of a psychological adjustment, but it's true. Um,
that's where I got started. Yeah.
so I want to ask this obnoxious question before we kind of outro. So you did all this. How did you do all this by yourself? How did you so I suppose again, the mathematics is where I would struggle the most. And I suppose it helped that Morkborg at least was there for a skeleton of the math. So let me start with that,
Okay.
because that's what I would struggle with the most, is the
Yeah,
actual
sure.
design of the rules.
Well, the core rules, you're rolling this die, armor works that way, resting is this. It's all from Borg. Um, and that's because I had done a little bit of game design. I had written a few 5e adventures. My biggest claim to fame prior to Pirate Borg was Limithron's Guide to Naval Combat, which if you're running 5th edition and you need naval combat rules, that's a great solution for you. Um, because I have played, I mean, I may be newer to D&D, but I am not new to pirates. I have been obsessed with pirates my entire life. I rode the ride as a kid. I At Gen Con one year, I won a tournament playing Pirates of the Spanish Main from WizKids. Like I've always loved pirates. My band used to play Talk Like a Pirate Day shows. Um, when it came to working on Pirate Borg, I just had to like take what I had written rules wise for naval combat for 5e and make it do the same thing that Morkborg did. Take rules out, make it narrative, make it fast, make it simple. And people seem to like it. I see people on Reddit who say that it's like, I'm just going to use the naval combat rules from Pirate Borg in my other role-playing game. So that was just a process. I mean, you were talking earlier about Chris doing Ravenloft, or like what you really get at RPGs like from is like inspiration kind of thing. I think for me, the reason that Pirate Borg works so well is because I care about it so much. And I'm not trying to be cheesy. Like, I really, really made this game because I wanted it. You know, like I didn't make it to make money, and I didn't make it because the market needed it. I made it because the market didn't have it, so I made it because I wanted it. You know, so I think that when you look through it and you're like, I'm really inspired by this, it's because I'm really inspired by it. And I think you can see that in other games like Shadow Dark or Cyborg, especially, where you're like, this is a thing that didn't exist and needed to be made. So for me, it's just like, while I have to make all this myself, I know what this page will look like. And if I spend long enough, I can draw the art. I know what these rules need to be. I just, it's like geology. You spend enough time, enough pressure, enough days locked in your basement during COVID, and Pirate Borg comes out for me. That was,
Oh man. Um, where to even begin with that? How much do you feel like you play tested those ship combat rules?
A lot. I have a regret in that I think that the HP is too high for what people want at a Pirate Board game. I designed the HP with like campaign and realism in mind, and I think if you play out real naval combat, that there's a little bit. If you play to 0 HP, the ship combat can really go on because they all have hulls, and a hull is just like armor in Morkborg, which is a damage soak. So my little tiny ship shoots your big ship. It soaks all the damage. It takes a long time. That being said, though, the mechanics of it we tested a lot, and it came off of the playtesting of Limithron's Guide to Naval Combat. And I've played a lot of those games, both in video game form and in war game form. So I like know, oh, it can't do this because like Oak and I is a good example from Firelock Games. I love that game. I played a lot of it at the beginning of COVID. That game is too crunchy for a role-playing game. So I knew what to take out. And you see that all the time in naval combat supplements. There's like, they try to make it too real. And like, you don't want it to be real. D&D is not real. It's fun, So I think we did a lot of playtesting for it. Yeah.
Well, and they say, write the novel that you want to read that you
Yeah.
don't see on the market, and the same is true of game design, I'm sure, where it's like, well, design the game that you want to play that's not on the market,
Yeah.
and you went out and did that.
And I mean, I can only hope, Ben, that like I keep going, and that eventually maybe I get lucky, and someday down the road when I'm 60, like one of those big AAA video game companies like, hey, Luke, we want to make this the next Red Dead Redemption, because that's the thing I really want, is to play a Dark Caribbean video game, you know what I'm saying? Or watch the movie. Like, I don't want Pirates of the Caribbean's a great movie, but like, I want the monsters to be scary, and I want it to be deadly. I want it to be great Game of Thrones at sea, I don't want it to be like a Disney movie.
So tell me about your podcast.
The Ship of the Dead. Yes. It's interesting you asked that because we're actually going on a little bit of a hiatus after next week because my next guest is Mike Merles. It's an OSR based podcast where mostly it turns out I've been interviewing uh, other game designers and other people in the industry. Um, I've really had a lot of fun doing it, but I am not behind on the Kickstarter, but I'm feeling pulled in too many directions. So I pushed all my guests off after Mike next week, and I'm just going to focus on the Kickstarter. But mostly we talk about like game design. Yeah, it's kind of like this, but with a little bit more of a focus on me pulling the things out that I can steal and use in my work. You know.
I mean, I find game designers to be fascinating figures. So I've listened, I think, to two episodes, but I'm gonna have to go back and revisit it because all other media makes me sad.
Yeah, yeah. I actually think that though I have had an interesting couple of weeks where I've really gotten intrigued by Mordheim and Trench Crusade. And I'm just like really into this. Like we're thinking about making a skirmish game after my Dark Caribbean book comes out in next year or so. And those guys have a podcast. The Trench Crusade guys have a podcast, and it's all about that game. So I think I'm going to try to pivot the podcast for my podcast to more about just Pirate Borg stuff in the future. I think it'll be a smaller audience, but the people who will listen will really, really care. You know.
Do you remember the name of the Trench Crusade artist?
Yes, his name is Mike Francina.
Okay.
And I mean, like literally, I found out about this game because Zach, who it works on my team, told me about it in the lightning round when I had him on the podcast because he has a Kickstarter right now for a Pirate Borg zine for Zine Quest. And I hadn't heard about Trench Crusade, and I went, sounds such a rabbit hole. And like 2 days ago, I bought Mike. He has a concept art course that he taught years ago. I bought that. I've listened to all of Thomas Pierinen's podcasts. He's the game designer. I'm like, dude, I went so far down that rabbit hole so fast, you know.
A buddy of mine went to high school with Francina, apparently, and he told me about Trench Crusade a few months ago, and I'm like, oh, this looks incredible, but it was just, you can't buy everything.
You
You
know
just
you
can't.
can't. And I mean it's a miniature. I mean, unless you're gonna be printing, like I don't play miniature games, so I'm not gonna like, you know, but I'm never gonna get that book when it comes out. That guy though, man, I mean, he is so talented. His art, I mean, I don't know if you know this, but basically the art for that game started because he was a Blizzard concept artist and like would be so irritated his ideas got shot down at work that he'd come home and draw like even darker stuff. And he
Man.
made his own IP. And then after like 7 or 8 years, they made some miniatures. And then they're like, hey, we should make a real game out of this. And then it just did like 5 million on Kickstarter after you know, it's like, you know,
That's incredible.
all because this guy had a vision in his head he wanted to get out. So very inspiring, you know.
So is is Pirate Borg the work that you would suggest people pick up of yours?
Oh yeah, I mean yes, it's unequivocally, yes. I'm working on the Dark Caribbean like I have been for years. At the moment we have plans to do a Pirate Borg version and a 5e version. I'd say when that book comes out, I'm hoping it will be my magnum opus because it'll be this big world that I have that inspired this game. But that's not out yet. So yeah, 100% Pirate Borg is the way. It's a direct view into my weird, happy but dark heart.
And anything else you want to plug?
Oh no, you mentioned the podcast. I mean, you know, if you're really interested, we did just have that Kickstarter end last October. We're hoping to fulfill by Talk Like a Pirate Day, which is September 19th. That has a Pirate Borg starter set in it, as well as Down Among the Dead and Cabin Fever, which is a collection of all the winners from our Cabin Fever itch.io jam. It's all like third-party Pirate Borg content we published. We also did a GM screen and like naval combat tokens, bunch of stuff. Too much stuff to talk about. But yeah, I mean, I'm very approachable. Join our Discord if you want to talk about Pirate Borg. At me at Limithron. Although I'm increasingly less on social spaces as I try to get this book out of my head and onto paper.
I will briefly say our podcast also has a Patreon. It is a mere $3 a month. We will never have another tier higher than that, I don't think. We're just trying to make the $3 tier so good everyone gives us $3.
Nice.
So we have special episodes just for Patreon subscribers. In the next week, I am going to host conversations between Gen Con owner and Wizards of the Coast founder Peter Adkison and historian Matt Shoemaker, talking about Peter stepping aside from running Gen Con. I'm going to be hosting a conversation between Ken Hite and Sandy Peterson on game design. And all of that will be only for podcast patrons. Also, I am digitizing my TTRPG document archive. Every week I am posting another document to the Discord. So if you just want to see, hey, what do I have in binders lying around here? What kind of letters do I have from TSR to the Tolkien estate? All of those things are slowly being put on the Discord. All that for less than the price of a cup of coffee. So how can you say no, I ask you? How can you say no?
I mean, much less than some cups of coffee, yeah.
All right. Well, it's been absolutely wonderful talking to you, Luke. I wish you all the best. I should have you on the show again sometime.
Anytime.